But first, man, I've been looking forward to this ever since Sunday night. So, it's weird. The last 72 hours, I've had this mix of emotions. Because on one hand, it's been validation, the emotion of validation, if you will. On the other hand, it's, it's not my team, so it's like I could celebrate it like if the Steelers did something great. But more than anything, what I'm feeling is disappointment. That's going to sound weird. Why do I feel disappointment right now? Because Kansas City winning 32-29 to clinch the AFC for the third consecutive season, doing so over the Buffalo Bills, get to them and Josh Allen in particular in about 15 minutes. Them doing that should be a validation for me. But I have the way I do my show, and I don't do it every show because I think that would make my show clickbaity. But oftentimes I will have a big kind of out there take that I think something in the future is going to happen. And I have swung and I have crushed it over the ballpark, or out of the ballpark, and I have swung and fell on my behind. An example of the latter would be the Denver Broncos to win the Super Bowl in 2022. Not great. Not one of my better days. Probably the worst take I've ever had. On the other side of that coin would be picking the Lions to go to the NFC title game in 2023, 9 months before they actually did it. And the Warriors winning the 2022 title. Those were out there picks that ended up coming true. Somehow, my Kansas City is the best team in football take actually gets to age really well, not because it ended up happening, but because it actually weirdly falls into the hot take category. I had to spend all season, from September to now, we are almost in February. The game will be played Super Bowl 59 on February 9th. I have had to sit here and hear all season long about what's wrong with this team, what's wrong with Patrick Mahomes, what's wrong with this Kansas City Chiefs defense, maybe slightly diminished from a year ago. I've had to hear about the wide receiving core and all the reasons Kansas City won't win the Super Bowl. And for me, it always boiled down to this. Let's see. Of all the contenders in football this year, AFC, NFC, I'm going to take a wild guess and say the team with the best quarterback, second greatest quarterback of all time, one of the greatest coaches of all time, the greatest big game playoff tight end of all time, Sunday notwithstanding, and the best defensive coordinator in the National Football League today, who, by the way, just so happened to have the best record in sports, in the NFL, after winning the last two Super Bowls. I'm going to go out on a limb and say they probably should be the favorite and probably should be regarded as the best team in the sport. Somehow that has not only aged well because I picked it, and by the way, I picked Kansas City before the season to three-peat. It has been narrative after narrative. All the reps and the games are fixed. There's the Taylor Swift factor. Folks, they won 2 Super Bowls before Taylor Swift even got there. Okay, the refs factor. We will do a segment on that next week because I want to give that its own segment. Today's the day to give the Kansas City Chiefs their shine. Why would I believe in the Kansas City Chiefs? What about Buffalo? Right, Josh Allen's playing clean football, and maybe this team can do something, and the Ravens are more explosive offensively than they were last year. Lamar Jackson, best year of his career. And what about this team? Maybe Houston can actually beat them. Maybe all of these different teams. There was a time my Steelers actually thought I would have had a puncher's chance, and then Christmas Day happened, and I let go of that take. All of these, even in the NFC, the Lions are – I love the Lions. I love me some Dan Campbell. But they're dropping 50 points every fifth game. And it's like, oh, Detroit is better than Kansas City. They couldn't even win a playoff game. And Philadelphia, hey, we'll find out on next Sunday how that matchup materializes. They beat Kansas City last time they faced them in Arrowhead Stadium last year. The time will tell on that one. This team's better than Kansas City. The 49ers are better than Kansas City. And why would I believe in the Chiefs? Well, mostly with respect to Reed, Kelsey, Steve Spagnuolo, who was unbelievable in the fourth down call, it mostly boils down to this. Patrick Mahomes, the playoffs, 17-3 record, 43 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. We'll show you where that ranks all time in just a moment. Completes 67% of his throws, 277 pass yards per game, and a passer rating of 105.8 in the postseason. And we can show you where some of those ranks all time. He's first all time in the playoffs in touchdown to interception ratio. He is first all times. That's his pass yards per game. That should say total yards per game. First all time in total yards per game. First in completion percentage. First in passer rating. First in win percentage. And he broke the tie with Joe Montana, the second winningest playoff quarterback ever to, of course, the GOAT himself, Tom Brady, who has 35 wins, which is absurd. Mahomes got a ways to go to catch Tom. There's no question about that. But what we know is, I've always said on my show, when it comes to deciphering who's a contender and who's not a contender, is if I have more questions than I do answers, if I have more uncertainty than certainty about who you are and what you're going to be in the biggest moments, I can't buy into you. Now, if you prove me wrong, great. I can sit up here and give you your flowers. But until that point, I can't do it. That's why young teams don't tend to win championships. Teams with playoff disappointment, players like the Houston Rockets in the James Harden era, like Lamar Jackson, the Ravens, why I don't tend to buy into them, not necessarily as not contenders, but teams I could actually see winning it all. The Vikings with Sam Darnold this year, it's why I bought into a team with the best, not the greatest, that's the difference, best playoff quarterback of all time, the best coach in the league, best defensive coordinator, big game tight end, and all of the narratives that have surrounded this team, all of the nonsense that has surrounded it. I go back to last year because I picked Kansas City to go to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl a year ago. I picked them to go back to back, and all season long they were 11-6. There was the problem with this. There was a real problem with guys like Valdez-Scantling and Tony and the drops. It's like, what is going on with this team? I mean, Mahomes is laying it right there on the money. But speaking of Mahomes had kind of a turnover problem for the longest time. What is going on with the Chiefs? They're a significantly lessened version of themselves. I never lost faith that they could win it all last year. I never once said I'm buying stock, or selling stock rather, in the Kansas City Chiefs. Never said that. But I got why people did. Of course I got what people did. They didn't look even close to what they were like in years past. Mahomes had probably the worst season of his career. The receivers weren't very good. Kelsey was a reduced version of himself. The defense was great, but that was really the only consistently great aspect of the Chiefs last year. And then they won it all against an 11-win Dolphins and Bills team, a 13-win Ravens team, and a 12-win Niners team. And after that game, I said, I will not bet against Patrick Mahomes until he gives me a reason to. I will not bet against this dynasty. We know they're a dynasty. That got cemented after they beat the Niners last year, but a team that is on an unprecedented run right now. So no team's three-peated, we know that, but no team's ever gone to the Super Bowl in pursuit of three-peat. The closest team that came to three-peating was the 1990 49ers, who lost in heartbreaking fashion to the Giants on a fumble. Long story. That was the closest one we'd seen, three-peat attempt we'd seen prior to this year's Chiefs team. And when I had to hear about how Lamar Jackson is all of a sudden going to be something that he has never been in his career, and that's a great playoff quarterback, and knock off Kansas City. Well, he didn't even get a chance to knock off Kansas City. The idea that the Buffalo Bills, with the inferior quarterback, the inferior coach, the inferior roster, the inferior defense, the inferior everything, not culture, that's not fair. Everybody's an inferior culture, Kansas City, but the inferior football stability, winning close games, whatever you want to call it. The idea that there was a credible argument to put anybody above this Kansas City Chiefs team all season long was laughable. The idea that anybody, I remember the Bills were the favorites for a short period. The Ravens were a favorite this year. Early in the year, the 49ers, I think, were the favorites to win the Super Bowl. Detroit, and I love Dan Campbell. I've been a Lions supporter for almost 2 years. I think they're great. The idea that they should be favored with Jared Goff and Dan Campbell over Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, it all looks pretty silly today, doesn't it? Rule of thumb in sports, be it the NBA, NFL, college football, or college sports for that matter, any industry, any line of business, anywhere, stop betting against the team that is not only has a history of being great, but is still great. I mean, for crying out loud, the Kansas City Chiefs broke their single-season franchise record, or at least in the Mahomes era they did, for wins in a regular season. They went 15-2, top seed in a stacked AFC, and all I had to hear is about, this is wrong with them. Folks, it was jealousy. It was nonsense. It was a disingenuous line of thought that not that this team was going to get the Super Bowl, but that this team should not be given not even a benefit of the doubt because they were the best team all season long. Patrick Mahomes not the Pro Bowl, right? How's that going to age years from now? Now, he would have been the first Pro Bowl alternate. Drake May made it, I think, as a Pro Bowl alternate. So did my man Russell Wilson. But you're going to look back. If Kansas City goes on to win the Super Bowl over Philadelphia, it is going to be, we're going to look back. One of the footnotes we're going to see is like they went 15-2, won their third straight Super Bowl, and Patrick Mahomes was not a Pro Bowler. But Joe Burrow on the 9-8 Bengals team that was the first team out of the playoffs, would have been the second team out of the playoffs 5 years ago. Yeah, he's better than Mahomes. Every year, Josh is better, Lamar's better. Joe, I know people personally, and I love him dearly, who would take Joe Burrow over Patrick Mahomes. We have lost the plot on this team, and I'm telling you, it is. I hear inevitability. I've heard some people say, "Oh, the Chiefs were inevitable." The same people were picking Buffalo all year long to knock off this team. If they're inevitable, treat them as if they're inevitable. They're as inevitable as Jordan's Bulls in the 90s, Brady's Patriots in the 2000s and 2010s, and the Warriors in the mid to late 2010s. It's that simple. And so, by the way, if you don't like it, knock them off. Don't get mad at Kansas City for doing what they've been doing for the last 7 years. Get mad at your own team for not knocking them off. Brady and Burrow, the only two guys that can say it. It's why I give Burrow an extra bump in my quarterback rankings, because I'm like, he's the only guy playing that has done it. So it is the idea that their greatness should be distilled to a bad officiating call, or even in the case of the Buffalo game, a catch by Xavier Worthy that was in any other game would be ruled a catch, which it was. And then the Josh Allen fourth down play where it's like, oh, he clearly got it. If they would have given him the first down, would have had no problem with it. If they would have called him short, which they did, I would have had no problem with it. The idea that was just this obvious, again, is intellectually dishonest. This was the best team in football from start to finish, with the best quarterback on earth, coach on earth, defensive coordinator on earth, and best big game playoff tight end in the history of the league. So, am I shocked Kansas City's in the Super Bowl? You asking me that? You're asking me that? Stop. This team is always going to get back to the Super Bowl. At least I felt that way. Anybody that thought otherwise, what games were you watching? It's part of the problems we have in the social media era is, I've always said, is the biggest thing that happened, the most important thing that's happened, and the biggest thing that's happened is the thing that happened most recently, because the thing I remember in my head most vividly, recency bias. This team is inevitable. I viewed them as inevitable from the jump. I get to be the genius today, the guy that was right, just because I went on very basic facts, a very, very basic premise of knowledge of what this team has been for a very, very long time. I don't know. But hey, you know what? Next year, if the Kansas City Chiefs, the 2 seed, go to Buffalo, pick the Bills. Knock yourself out. Pick Buffalo. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube, and be sure to go click that big red subscribe button and check out the other clips and full shows from Carving It Up Live, as well as our other incredible content creators here on the Grid Network.